All right, we've made it at long last to the segment I know you've all been waiting for. The segment that I've been waiting for this whole time. This is going to be our once in a season deep dive, and not super deep, but deep enough. This is going to be Nert Duble's guide to fantasy football kickers starting in week 5 of 2024, at least. But get excited because this is the segment that this whole show has been building toward and culminating in the best. This is the best analysis that I've probably done on the show so far. So just get excited, okay? Get freaking excited. As I was getting this segment together, I had this realization. In Minecraft, how do you like my diamond armor, by the way? In Minecraft, there's no kicking. Think about it. Even this horse behind me. No creature in this game kicks, including me. I have no way of kicking. I can swing my legs like I'm kicking, but I can't, like, if I come up to a villager and, like, try to kick them, I can't. All I can do is punch them. I can't. My legs don't affect them. Like, I can't kick you. Kick you in the face. It doesn't work, see? I can't. I try, but I can't. There's no kicking in Minecraft. There's no takeaway from that. I don't have any segue from that. But there's no kicking in Minecraft. You know, it just doesn't happen. But there is kicking in American football. And this week we saw muffed kicks. We saw blocked kicks. We saw teams that don't trust their kicking for various reasons. All the more reason for you. Whatever. So I'm going to give you an unofficial list here of kickers that I consider to be top-tier kickers. These are guys that I believe are going to end the season as top 12 players at the position. So I'll start with, and I think I have 11 names on this initial list, but then I'm going to give you a few names of players that I think could make it up onto this, and I'm sure all 11 of the names I'm going to name may not end up as the top 12 kickers in the league, but I believe that they will. This is my list of the top kickers in fantasy football rest of season, starting with the kickers that got drafted by somebody. Obviously, at the top in a tier by himself right now is Brandon Aubrey of the Cowboys. But the other kickers that fall into this tier of top 12 that actually got drafted, it's not that long of a list. It's Kaimi Fairbairn, who probably got drafted, but might have gotten picked up a little later. Younghoe Koo, Harrison Butker, Jake Moody, who just got injured and is likely to miss some time. So he's probably going to miss out on top 12 all season long. And more importantly, you got to drop him for now, probably. Maybe Evan McPherson, maybe Tyler Bass, who might have been not necessarily drafted, but most likely drafted in your leagues. That's the list. So that's not counting Moody. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 kickers out of the top 12. The kickers that probably didn't get drafted that are in the top 12 for me are as follows. Chase McLaughlin of the Bucks. And these guys are in no particular order. I'm just saying this is the tier. This is the whole tier. Listed off. Chase McLaughlin, Chris Boswell, Cairo Santos, Cameron Dicker, Will Reichard moving up, and probably Austin Seibert. I think that's a total of 11 if you count both McPherson and Bass in that list. Now, second tier kickers that I think might be climbing into that first tier, here's your handful of names. Will Lutz of the Broncos, Blake Grupe of the Saints, Cam Little, the kicker for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Greg Joseph of the New York Giants, and I guess I'll throw in, I haven't really watched this team at all, but Nick Folk of the Tennessee Titans. And I will throw a bone to the fantasy players out there, and yes, I'll throw in to this tier Justin Tucker, although I do not think he's a top 12 kicker this year, and I think you can do better, and you can drop him for somebody better. That's my hot take. But I do think Justin Tucker falls into this tier of players who might make their way into the top 12. And because they're rookies and we don't yet know if they're going to get more of the, especially like the longer kicks and stuff, I'm going to add 2 more rookies in addition to Cam Little, which is Jake Bates and Joshua Carty. Jake Bates for the Lions and Joshua Carty playing for the Rams. If you didn't hear the name of your kicker listed in either of those segments or in any of those groups above, I believe you should be dropping them for one of the players I listed. At least one of those guys I listed is out on your waivers. At least probably 2 or 3 are out there on your waivers. Yes, I'm talking to you, Jake Elliott, Greg Zuerlein, Dustin Hopkins, Jason Myers, Jason Sanders. I don't know who else got drafted in your league, but there's some people with those kickers starting, and I think those guys should all be dropped. If your player was listed on a tier below the top, you may consider dropping them for a kicker I put on the tier above them, and yes, I do mean Justin Tucker. Unless you're paying more attention than I am to that particular kicker, like if it's your team and you're paying close attention and you see reason to trust them going forward, by all means, I'm no expert on this. I'm just saying I'm just somebody who does pay attention to this position, and I really believe in what I'm saying here. If you're streaming kickers on a weekly basis, my suggestion is just to stay generally within those names I listed, if possible. You can still be switching week to week, especially if your league is shallow enough that a lot of these guys aren't getting picked up and held. But the biggest thing you can do to improve your outcomes with kicker is to think about potential game script in a little bit of depth when choosing a kicker. With that said, with the idea that you can stream every week being absolutely fine every season in fantasy football, I suggest, just for your own sake, finding one of those players, or maybe swapping between a couple, but finding one of those players that you can hold. I think players like Chase McLaughlin, despite my mistake of starting him the week he scored 1 point and then dropping him while he subsequently had 2 good weeks, he's the kind of player that I think you can just set and forget. I think a lot of those guys on that tier are going to be set and forget players. They might be a little bit matchup dependent, and so you may still want to stream at times, but I believe you can. In the early part of the season, the last few weeks, you start to, especially if nobody cares about kickers in your league, maybe even you can do this all season, you pay attention to which kickers are looking like they're going to be top 12 season long, which ones in particular you think can trend towards the top half of that top 12, and you can have your pick of the litter of these guys, outside of the ones that were drafted, obviously, like Brandon Aubrey. And yeah, I think it's a nice thing to do. I think that now is about the time to start doing that if you haven't already. So yeah, I listed off the players on the tiers. I want to talk a little bit deeper about the risk factors that kickers have. And I'm going to use the example of Austin Seibert for the Commanders, who actually has a couple of these risk factors, but who I also, put onto that top tier. So we'll talk about his case, and we'll go through some of these factors that I think, just generally speaking, so you get a sense of how to do this kicker thing going forward. So I'm putting him in the top 12, Austin Seibert. That said, he has a few of these different forms of risk. All the forms of risk to a kicker obviously come down to limited field goal opportunities. Field goals in fantasy are worth 3 points. Long field goals are sometimes worth 4 points for 40 plus, and are often worth 5 points for 50 plus. And extra points are only worth 1 point. So field goal opportunities is the thing you really want for kickers above everything else. So there's a bunch of different risk factors, and those risk factors can compound for the same player. The first risk factor we'll talk about here is what I call extra point-centric role, or being an extra point guy. This is certainly a risk for Seibert. Anytime you're on a team that has a good touchdown-scoring offense, you get the risk that you're just not going to be able to sustain, getting field goals every game. This is a risk for guys like Evan McPherson and Justin Tucker. We saw this past game with Evan McPherson, that risk play out where he had there was an issue with the hold in overtime. He would have had 1 field goal if he had, or he would have had at least a chance at making 1 field goal in overtime, but he had like 4 fantasy points. His team scored a bunch, but all he did was kick extra points all game. I thought it was nighttime, but it's not nighttime. How embarrassing. So that is a risk. Even if you're on a good offense, if your role is just extra points, that's a risk. However, that's where it intersects with another one of these factors, which I'm going to kind of talk across different categories. Team trust. If the team trusts a kicker they're going to take more chances on field goals. And if they're a team that is willing to settle for field goals because of other factors, such as, the fact that their defense can keep the other team off the field, good defenses are generally correlated with good kicking. But that's not necessarily, automatically the case. So anyway, extra point centric role. Another big risk factor for kickers is just not getting 50-plus yard kick attempts. As I mentioned, 50-plus yard kicks are worth 5 points in fantasy. That's a significant upgrade. Those can really make a difference for your ultimate, scoring line in fantasy. So therefore, kickers that are trusted with 50-plus yard kicks by their team and can make them consistently are elite fantasy kickers. Obviously, that's why you have guys like Aubrey up there at the top. Someone who's not a 50-plus yard kicker historically, this is the reason I'm out on guys like Jason Myers, Jason Sanders. Accuracy issues historically, and 50-plus yard kick ability. These are things that I think they both kind of are factors in the team's trust in a kicker, giving them more opportunities. Austin Seibert and Greg Joseph is another guy who has this kind of a risk where these guys were replacement kickers. They didn't even start the season on a roster. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that they may not get those longer opportunities. They may not kick as many of those longer field goals. We haven't seen that. We've seen some of that, I think, historically for Greg Joseph. I didn't look at Austin Seibert's past seasons, but they're both consistent. They're both getting a lot of opportunities, but they may miss out and have risk on that one dimension of not getting as many of these longer kicks. These are guys who have had, again, they didn't make teams to start the season. So far this season, since they've been on their teams, they've had great accuracy. But keep in mind that that's another risk factor for kickers. And keep in mind that there's other reasons why teams don't trust kickers. Obviously, especially if they have aforementioned accuracy issues or depth of kick limitations. In Seibert's case, though, I think he gained the team's trust, but you also have teams that go for it on fourth down, not because they don't trust the kicker, but because they're just freaking good, and they can just go for it on fourth down because they want to. This particularly shows up with teams that have running quarterbacks, and I would say just on high-functioning offenses in general. So you see it as a risk factor for Jake Elliott in Philly. You see them going for fourth downs. You see the tush push and all that stuff limiting Jake Elliott's opportunity for field goals. You see that with Tyler Bass in Buffalo. You see that probably with Justin Tucker in Baltimore sometimes, where the fact that these quarterbacks and that these high-functioning offenses will go for it on fourth and short keeps the kicker off the field at times. That could be a risk factor here for Seibert as well, because that's certainly what it's looking like. The Commanders are that kind of a team. I don't think it's a major risk factor, but it's worth considering that that's another reason the kickers aren't on the field. And it's not because they're not trusted. It's just because the offense will go for it on fourth down. There's other reasons that teams will not kick it that also don't have to do with trust. A bad, low-scoring offense is going to be behind in games chasing the other team. That's a situation where the kicker is often, looked over in favor of going for it on fourth down, in favor of taking more high-risk plays that lead to turnovers. That's also another reason kickers don't get opportunities. Being on a team with a bad defense, even if your offense is okay, if the defense is bad, the opponents score high and get lots of points on the board. Your team opts to skip field goals because they're going for it because they're playing more aggressively to play catch up. So it could be a bad offense, it could be a bad defense, it could be both. Shootouts aren't inherently bad for kickers, but if your defense is giving up points, your offense has to be able to keep up for that to be a good situation for a kicker. I think that teams that have to play more aggressively on offense often have to do so because of bad defense, which is probably part of the reason why good defenses and good kickers are correlated. So when you look at someone like Kaimi Fairbairn, you have a great example of somebody who does have some of those. All these kickers are going to have a risk factor too, with the exception of maybe Brandon Aubrey on a tier of his own. Fairbairn has the risk factor of being an extra point guy on a team that can put up a bunch of points offensively, but they trust him with long-ass 58-yard kicks on a regular basis. So that counteracts that. That counteracts any risk there, or at least to the point where he still is elite. Younghoe Koo has had some accuracy issues. He's missed kicks. He hasn't quite the accuracy of the other elite kickers, but he's trusted with long kicks. He looks like he's going to have a lot of opportunity for this Atlanta team. He's somebody who stays in that tier without question. Harrison Butker, his team he's a potentially an extra point guy. Not this past week he had a bunch of field goals, but not every week is he going to. I think he has the range. Obviously, he has the trust of the team. Obviously, and his team this is not the Chiefs' team of past where they're gonna just rack up touchdowns every game. So he has those things that keep him in this tier for me. I think Jake Moody was, elite and trusted and had a leg, but obviously will miss time, so we're not going to consider him. McPherson and I mentioned Tyler Bass. They both have extra point guy risk. They both have teams. Well, McPherson has team in shootout mode risk, team with bad defense risk. Tyler Bass also, I didn't mention this other risk factor, which I can't believe I didn't mention. But the weather that a kicker plays in matters too. One of the reasons I'm usually out on Tyler Bass as a kicker, for example, is early season it's fine, but late season in Buffalo, you don't want to kick in those conditions. And conditions for kickers do matter. Kickers in Denver get to playing in high elevation. That gives you more distance on kicks apparently. So obviously Will Lutz, but even the visiting kicker in Denver might be a good start. When they're playing in Denver, when teams are playing in rain or playing in snow or high wind, that's a factor for kickers. So that's another factor when we talk about making a decision around streaming. You want to look into not only game script but the game conditions as well. I should mention. But what else was I going to say about that? Just that. I think that Tyler Bass, that's a risk factor there. And then, McLaughlin, you have, I think, a good situation. He's got the trusted leg. He's kicking long kicks. And he's in a situation where the team is good, but not necessarily going to only score touchdowns. He may have a little extra point guy risk. But he's trusted and he has the leg. I think that's sort of similar for Boswell. He's got the leg. He's trusted. His team is a little bit less explosive than a team like the Buccaneers with the Steelers, but they're probably going to be a team that controls games, that moves the ball, but that doesn't necessarily explode for touchdowns. Game script dependent a little bit maybe because of chasing, their defense is good, but they may need to score touchdowns in games like we saw this past week with the Cowboys. Just because their offense isn't good enough to get it done doesn't mean that they're automatically going to be kicking field goals all the time. But Chris Boswell's right there in this tier for me. Cairo Santos with the Bears, an emerging team, but that still doesn't have everything put together. They do give Cairo Santos long field goal attempts, so he has the 50-plus kicks going for him. Cameron Dicker, I think, falls in the same category. As far as I know, he's trusted with long kicks. This Chargers team is one that probably won't put up a gazillion touchdowns. They're a run-first team. I hate to say everybody's Steelers style. Like, Steelers aren't the only ones that get credit for this, but Cairo Santos, Cameron Dicker fall in that same category. Will Reichard on the Vikings, number one. He's number one in my heart and Captain Picard's heart, but I think he's like number 16 on the Vikings. I don't know. He plays a different number on the Vikings, not number one. A good offense. Seems like they trust him with kicks. This is more of a situation where he may be an extra point guy. He is still a rookie. He may develop. He may not, continue to have really good accuracy, but so far he's doing good. This team is just putting up a lot of points, and they're not a team that I think has such a good offense that they're just going to always score touchdowns. As we saw this game against the Jets, they're a good offense, but that doesn't mean that they're an unstoppable offense. Seibert I put on this tier because despite those factors working against him or the risks there, he's on a really good offense. I think similarly, even though they can put up a bunch of touchdowns, I don't think they always score touchdowns. I do think that they have a lot of trust for him, even though he came into the season. This team has good vibes around it, so I'll put him there. It might be Will Lutz that takes that spot. It might be Greg Joseph or Blake Groupie or one of these other guys, but yeah, that's my tier of top kickers. I think those guys are likely to be top 12 kickers on the season. Nick Folk deserves consideration here for the Titans. If they can, with Will Lutz, on the Titans with Will Levis, that's the biggest risk factor I see for someone like Nick Folk. They just might have too many turnovers. They might be playing from behind too much. There's risk factors for everybody who I put on that second tier. But I think probably Will Lutz right now. If I have to put somebody else on that top tier, it's probably Will Lutz. So that's my deep, in-depth kicker thing. I hope you enjoyed it.